What's up guys, Phoenix here. This video is going to be another DN match commentary, and this time I'm going to be playing with the Geargia Demise deck yet again. Just trying to test the idea of this deck potentially benefiting as much from Card of Demise as the other as previously established Card of Demise decks like Qliphort, Satellar, Prophecy, Cosmo, stuff like that. Seeing as the Geargia engine itself is something that is very versatile in being able to play games on its own. Although it is probably one of the weaker engines simply because things rely more on flip summoning than, things might allow you to do in terms of how fast this game is currently. But it also just has access to all of the good floodgates as well in the form of Defissure, Macro, Rivalry of Warlords, stuff like that. And so that brings us to the purpose of this video, is that during my playtesting session with my friend, we actually decided that we wanted to test how well this deck stacks up against other decks that previously established themselves as good decks to use Card of Demise in. In this case, Qliphort Demise. Now, I believe both decks have their advantages and disadvantages against each other, the main one being the fact that, my deck doesn't rely around Scout, but it does rely around Geargia Armor, which is, a card that has to be flip summoned, but in that same, in that same area, Geargia Armor is 1900, thus being bigger than everything that he can normal summon or pendulum summon without tributing, not counting outside sources like Sacrifice or the scales that make his monsters bigger. Without counting those, Geargia Armor is bigger than anything he can normal summon, but on the same flip side of that coin, his deck has access to the pendulum summon if need be, and also has access to Qliphort Carrier to continually bounce my Geargia Armors and stuff like that. But while this deck doesn't have access into the pendulum mechanic, it does have access into some pretty handy floaters in the form of Geargiano, Geargia Accelerator, Gear Gigant, getting back the Geargianos, and just being able to flip-flop armors multiple times a turn if you just amass more of them, thus meaning you can outclass Scout, all these different things. Ultimately, the decks very much have their pros and cons in terms of how they interact with each other, and ultimately I just wanted to test the matchup because, if you do decide to play this deck at any sort of event, whether it be regional or YCS level, you should expect to play against some of the already aforementioned and previously established Card of Demise decks, Qliphort Demise and Yosenju Demise being arguably the more popular versions, and then Satellar and Cosmo Demise being, stuff that some people might play maybe, but you definitely have a much less chance of running into those, I believe, than you would running into something like Qliphort Demise, and that's what we decided to test in our little playtesting session. As you see, the deck list hasn't changed from the previous video at all, although if I were to change anything, I would probably take out Geargia Accelerator and Ancient Gearbox and side down, side the third Geargia Accelerator and just main either 1 or 2 Geargia Accelerators just to bring the monster count, a bit lower, because 14 is rather high for a Card of Demise deck, especially since none of these cards can be put in pendulum scales or anything like that. It's very problematic when you start drawing multiples of them. And it might actually be something to note to possibly side a couple of Geargia Augurs, just to give yourself, those games you're going to be going second, side in Geargia Augurs and take out Card of Demise or something like that, just so you have a play going second in the form of being able to, aggressively go into Gear Gigant and stuff like that, because that is a very big problem that this version of the deck suffers from, is that, outside of opening with a Geargia and Geargia Accelerator, you're not going to be doing much of anything going second other than trying to set armor or set Geargia gear, and that effectively means that you start your game on turn 4 rather than turn 2, and that's actually just a big disadvantage for a deck like this. But anyway, that's enough rambling on in this little deck section of this video. I'm just going to jump into the match so you can see how this thing ultimately plays out against another big Card of Demise based strat. Alright, so going into the first game of this match, I end up losing rock, paper, scissors, which is a very big blow to me potentially winning this match, because like I already mentioned, when you go second with this deck, you essentially go fourth, because you have to set your armor, set your Geargia gear, and then you don't have any play that you're making until your second turn of the match, which is turn 4. So there is definitely that, but my opening hand is very good if I had gone first, but he's going first, and he gets to start off with Summoner's Art, searching Scout, and then he plays the Scout, sets 2, normal summons Carrier, and then activates Card of Demise, just doing the standard nonsense. He resolves a couple of Into the Voids, and just ultimately is very far ahead of me in the fact that, one, he's already resolved his Card of Demise, whereas I have my own Card of Demise to follow up with, but it's going to be potentially weakened by the fact that I could draw another monster as well, and I've already got an arsenal that I can't unload out of my hand, things like that. Little intricacies are becoming problems here. But he activates Duality and reveals 2 monsters and a card of Demise and just takes the other card of Demise. Then in phase discards a Helix that he drew off the initial card of Demise that he could not get out of his hand. So ultimately, just because of the fact that he is much farther ahead of me in terms of the game, because of the fact that he went first, is a big problem here. And I draw another monster. I draw an Accelerator, which is not ideal in any stretch of the imagination, because that means that I can set my armor and I can activate card of Demise. That'd be cool and all, but the problem being that that I can only draw 1 off card of Demise at this point. But I do draw Accelerator, so I mean, in terms of a monster that I drew, it was definitely like the best one that could have definitely been. So I normal summon Arsenal, and I special summon Accelerator, and his carrier is actually 21 because Stealth gives it a 300 attack boost, and that's why I don't attack into it. And so I just set my 3 cards and pass my turn. I was planning on making a Geargia that turn, and just kind of waiting to do my card of Demise thing later, because I can potentially hold card of Demise as long as I'm making plays. But even though knowing he has his own card of Demise is going to be the biggest problem, because he duality for it the previous turn. But so that emptiness just ends up stopping me. He flips over his pot of duality that he had set from the previous turn, gets an upstart goblin, emptiness dies, and then he upstarts and then flips his face down card of Demise. So he has 2 sets that I don't know what they are. All the cards are basically new at this point. He resolves another Into the Void, so he's resolved all 3 Into the Voids this game. And I believe at this point he drew 3 monsters. I can't remember exactly, but there's a point in this match where we just have problems with drawing a lot of monsters. And so, or no, he drew Sacrifice. Okay, I can't remember which point in the match it is, but in one point, one of us just starts drawing tons of monsters off card of Demise. But anyway, so he uses Scout, searches for Helix, and then activates the Sacrifice he drew on the Helix, attacks over my Accelerator first, and then my Arsenal. 1, because it weakens the Arsenal, and 2, because if he had killed the Arsenal first, the Accelerator would have added it back to my hand. So there's definitely that. And so, from this point on, I'm just like, I can start playing this game kind of now, I guess. He sets 2 more cards, and his stuff is still huge, because his Helix is 24, and I end up just dualitying and getting another card of Demise, so I'm not going to flip the one that I have face down. I'm going to definitely keep that there as long as it needs to be. And so I set my armor and activate the new card of Demise and draw 3 monsters. And I'm just like, oh my god. Oh, whoa. That's like such a minus. That is such a minus indeed. And I was just like, I remember at the time that it happened, I was like, what the actual hell is going on here? Like, I only play, I only have 8 more monsters in my deck or something like that. I actually counted the number, and I was like, I drew 3 of them in a row. It's like, wow. But so he ends up tributing his Helix, or tributing his carrier for a Monolith, and then bouncing my armor to hand. And then he tries to pendulum summon his carrier, and I just warning it because I want the carrier to be out of circulation. It's something I definitely don't want to keep dealing with. He doesn't end up paying anything off Scout because he doesn't need any extra cards at this point. And I draw another monster. I drew Geargia for turn, and then I flip my face down card of Demise after resetting my armor, and I draw 2 more monsters. And I was like, you know what? Fuck this. This game is over. And then I look at my deck, and the next 5 cards are all traps. And it's like, wow, how unlucky for me, right? That was just the absolute worst. After I've shuffled my deck off duality, it just put 6 monsters in a row, and I'm just really on tilt at this point. So going into side decking. Pretty much always the Giant Hand usually comes out for Starless Dragon, and that way I can put in Starlight Roads. Giant Hand is really just not really that optimal of a card. It's there for the option to be able to summon a defensive line, and I just end up swapping out some cards that are more ideal, swapping into things that actually matter, like Full House and stuff like that, because I've already got Twin Twisters in the main, so I definitely have the potential for a bunch of different stuff to possibly happen. And so I'll go first because I lost. I'm like, alright, so I get to go first. I open Full House, which is actually really good, and then I'm able to resolve a card of Demise while also setting another card of Demise. And off of my first card of Demise, I draw 3 more trap cards. One of them ends up being Geargia, which I have to keep. I'd rather have kept maybe the other card of Demise, but I already had another one set, so just decided not to actually deal with that. And so just set Geargia because Geargia will make me a Gigant during my next turn potentially. So there's definitely that. So he dualities and ends up taking Soul Transition, which allows him to do things on my turn with popping cards, with Helix, drawing new cards, things like that. It's definitely something that I'm very aware that he could be capable of doing. It doesn't look like he has card of Demise yet from the cards that he's playing, and I'm just like, I'm perfectly fine with this ultimately, as I just take 18 to the mouth, and ultimately, he just decides to start playing around, he plays around full house by not actually activating anything in his scale and not playing Card of Demise whether or not he had it. So, like, it just ends up being something that's, like, very favorable for him, is the fact that, like, whether or not he had Card of Demise in this point in time, he just decides not to activate it, because the second you activate Card of Demise, you lose the ability to play around full house. So there's definitely that. So I Geargia Gear in his in phase for my 2 Geargianos, and then depending on the card I draw is going to determine whether or not I, make Geargia or whether or not I, activate Card of Demise. And so he warnings my Geargia, and I take a little bit of time to think about whether or not I can activate Card of Demise, because of the fact that my special summon was negated, the inherent special summon was negated. So like, I was wondering if I could use Card of Demise or not, and I was just like, wait, no, it's the exact same as the old pod duality ruling, where if you tried to special summon Cyber Dragon and it got warning, the game state recognizes that you attempted to special summon, and thus you cannot activate duality. Same thing with Card of Demise. And so I set warning past my turn. He in phase tributes Helix for Soul Transition, and snipes my warning because it was the fresh set, and he's like, ooh, good. And so he Summoner's Arts for Qliphort Scout, pays 8, searches a card, normal summons another Helix, and then pokes me for 18 and goes to pass his turn. And so at this point I draw a Twin Twister, which is definitely just all by its lonesome, and I can't activate it this turn either, just because of the fact that, like, I just said it, it's a quick play spell, so that's the problem. Arguably it was better to just, like, or arguably it was correct to just, go ahead and just Card of Demise with the Twin Twister still in my hand and draw 2 cards, and then I'd be able to Twin Twister there. But, like, ultimately, it just ends up being like the play that I end up going with, was setting Twin Twister and drawing 3. I draw into Raigeki and Geargia Gear and Solemn Strike, and so I Raigeki his Helix, set my Geargia Gear, and so at this point I have, Twin Twister and Full House Life. He can't play around both. Like, I'm going to be able to Twin Twister him at the very beginning of my next turn, depending on what happens, and, like, it would be a free Twin Twister as well, because on his in phase, I still have 2 Geargianos in the deck. So on his in phase, I can Geargia Gear into the 2 Geargianos, make Geargigant and then Geargigant for box, and then add a card like Arsenal. In which case, I would be able to, discard the box for the Twin Twister for free, and then, get an armor set and, established and ready to go. So I take another 18 on his in phase. I do just that. I flip my Geargia Gear, get my 2 Geargiano MK2s out of the deck. They're both level 4s. I've got Call of the Haunted set. I've got Solemn Strike set. I've got all these different things. And so I draw another Call of the Haunted, and I just decide to go ahead and Twin Twister here, just in case that's something like a Solemn Strike or something. I definitely want to keep the resource that I have, and I already have 1 Call of the Haunted face down, so I just decide I don't need duplicate resources here, because I can just start going and pressuring him, and if I pressure him, then that's going to make him, like, have to activate Card of Demise and try to set everything, in which case I can blow him back and blow him out with Full House, because, the Twin Twister has already, resolved. Qliphort Scout's out of the game, so he doesn't get any more free advantage here, and so it just ends up being something that I'm able to generate in terms of getting back into a good game state and position, because Geargia there, searches Arsenal, I get to normal summon it, and I get to poke him over his Helix and poke him for damage, and then I get to go into armor, and then armor being set just allows me to have potential plays during the following turn. This is like the first turn in the entire game that I've just, like, actually been able to say that I'm in, like, a decent position. But so his turn, he goes double into the void, MST, pops my set, ends up being the Solemn Strike. He was trying to go for Full House, but he missed it, because he was like, that one's the Full House, it's gotta be. It's like, nah, man, I never set my best card first. Like, come on now. That's definitely not how I roll. I'm not that predictable. I don't set the best card that I want to resolve first. If I'm gonna set 4 cards, I'm gonna randomly put it somewhere. Like, I literally just objectively just make an idea in my head of where I'm putting it, somewhere between first and last. So he sets 3, passes his turn, and then on my turn I draw Duality. I flip my armor face up, and he Solemn Strikes it, and on the attempt to search, because he's really low at this point, and so now what I'm actually capable of doing is I'm capable of just getting box and getting Arsenal, because if I Duality for anything, I'm probably going to take a trap. I would probably most likely not take Card of Demise if I Duality for it, and so I get box, get Arsenal, normal summon Arsenal, and at this point I could very, very easily just get Drowning Mirror Force, which I end up doing, but Geargigant floats into one of the Geargianos when it leaves the board. And so what he does is that when I activate my Geargigant's effect to, summon another one from grave to summon a Geargiano, he tries to chain Emptiness, and in response to his Emptiness, I chain my Call of the Haunted on armor. So it's just 100% game there from that point forward. And so I decided that there's like really nothing else in my side deck that I could put in. Like, I literally took out every single card that would be like bad, and I still just didn't have enough side deck cards to put in. So like basically it was just like the rivalries came out and like other cards went in. Like it's actually just terrible trying to side deck against this deck with my current build, because my side deck is just awful. And here I am going second again, the problem of the deck, but ultimately it actually ends up not being that like problematic overall because of the fact that I do have Arsenal and Accelerator. And so he goes Duality and like just gets Card of Demise access. I can't remember if he got it off the Duality or if he got something else, but he sets 4, activates Card of Demise, and then I'm just like sitting here looking at this full house. Is like, all right, so he's already activated Card of Demise. There's no real way for him to play around full house as soon as he starts drawing into scales. But off of his Card of Demise, he resolved Duality, I think, into the Void and Card of Demise, and still didn't draw into a monster. So his Card of Demise ended up basically just being an upstart goblin, in that he got to pick the best trap that he wanted to set, and then he just had to discard the other 2. And so that ended up being the problematic part of his side. I drew too many monsters off my Card of Demise, drew 3 Card of Demise monsters, and he ended up drawing 3 traps, when he could only set 1. So problems with this deck and these decks are very numerous. But anyway, so I normal summon my Arsenal, special summon my Accelerator, and then I poke him with the Arsenal. And then main phase 2, I try to use my Arsenal's effect to go into armor, to which he strikes, which is, you know, perfectly fine. It's actually what I was like would love for him to do continuously. Is like I just get extra damage, and then I set 4 and pass. And during my end phase, he MSTs my face down Geargia gear. He snipes the Geargia gear. Out of everything he could have sniped, he sniped that one. And I'm just like, all right, well, this is going to be an issue. But as soon as this Accelerator dies, it gets back Arsenal, and then Arsenal can get armor. And so at this point, he uses Card of Demise again, and he plays his 2 monsters in his scale, and he has 3 sets, and so I'm able to full house him. So he plays Scout and Monolith in his scale, and he's like, you know what, I'm dumb. I should have just activated Scout first, and then at least gotten a search. And it was like, yeah. I was like, you want to take it back? He's like, nah, it's my misplay. My misplay. I'm gonna go with it. It's like, all right, respectable. So during his end phase, after he sets a card and passes, I use Call the Haunted on Arsenal, and then on my turn, I tribute Arsenal and get Geargiano out of my deck so that Geargia becomes a floater, and then I tribute the Ano to get back my Arsenal. And then, you know, I drew Accelerator for turn, as you see, and I'm able to go into multiple Gigants for the game, as well as just do other things because I still have my normal summon available to me. So I'm able to pump out, even though he mid-defeat, I showed him what my ending board could be, so I ended up just pumping out double Gigant, plus being able to search for Box and Arsenal, normal summon Arsenal, and then just, you know, win from there because he's too low in life. So with a very, very clutch full house, I'm able to just, you know, win this matchup. So both decks do definitely have this, like, advantages and disadvantages against each other in terms of how they can operate, how Card of Demise interacts with them overall, things like that. But ultimately, I think if you're going to try and play at any sort of event, the Qliphort deck is probably just better, simply because, like, the problem that I had with against this deck in this match was the fact that I just didn't have enough cards to side, and I have a lot of very terrible cards in my main deck that I need to take out, but I only have like 3 or 4 cards to side against Card of Demise decks like Qli and stuff like that, because you have to dedicate like a lot of your side deck to other matchups as well because you're playing Geargia. Things like that just ended up being problematic, and they definitely showed their face in this specific matchup. But like I said, there are a few changes I might make to the deck in terms of just cutting some cards, making the monster lineup a bit smaller, stuff like that. But otherwise, y'all are free to tweak around with this as much as you want, because like it's just another cool concept. It's just another old deck that, you know, can function in very simplified game states that just gets a boost from Card of Demise. So there's definitely that. But anyway, as always, guys, thanks for watching. Like, comment, subscribe to all the nonsense you usually do. Let me know what you guys think about this and these videos in these comments and these whatchamajigs down below. Things like that. Can't remember what I'm trying to say anymore because I'm losing my goddamn mind. But other than that, if you want to support me, clicking ads on my videos and disabling ad block when you view my videos is the best way to do so. It would be really cool of you if that's something you could take a few seconds out of your day to do, and it helps out a ton, and you would have my eternal gratitude if that's something that I've already said you could take a few seconds out of your day to do. It would be greatly appreciated. But other than that, that is all for this video. Let me know what you guys think about this video and these types of videos down in the hutchamajig, and let me know if you want to see more. I don't know if I'll play with Geargia anymore, just because, you know, it gets kind of boring after a little while, but ultimately might test some other potential options that are competitive in nature, at least in terms of theory and theory O. But other than that, that's it for this video, and as always, guys, take care.